up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Sembrando Ideales. Bienvenidos a otro episodio de Sembrando Ideales. We're here with a special guest today, Norma Rodriguez, and she's going to be talking about Prop 15, which is a prop that's going to be in the voting ballot November 3rd. And it's important for all of us to be informed about the special, how important it is for businesses, small businesses especially. And we're gonna have Norma introduce yourself, please.
No. Let me introduce her. I wanted to. I'm the one that invited her.
Okay.
So,
I was gonna ask if we should do it. Yeah.
So I mean, y'all can chip in here, but like, I'm really excited to have Norma on because for me, and I apologize to put you on blast, Norma, but she's one of the like most chingona like organizers that I know. She's doing awesome stuff for Californians for Justice. She's their policy director. Like you're the policy director, like statewide, no?
I was. There was a shift. I'm the organizing director, so I'm hyper focused on Long Beach right now. Mm-hmm.
So she's the organizing director, hyper focused on Long Beach, but man, she's done shit up and down the state, like going back 20 years since she was a machista, at UC Irvine, and so like I'm just really excited because she is someone I really trust in Long Beach in terms of like actually understanding how power functions, how power works, and building local community-based power, in which I feel like we need more of in sort of current context of what's going on in our city. When this airs, it's going to be a couple weeks, but Long Beach City Council, voting down to put people's budget. It's something that we sort of got to work on. And so, like Norma, like I can't sing your praises enough. Like I have mad respect for Norma. And so I'm really glad that she's here to talk to us about Prop 15 specifically, because that's what she's focusing on right now, doing a lot of the good work in the community. So that's Norma.
Yes, Norma, we are so happy to have you here.
I'm excited to be able to chat with you all about this proposition, right? When Alfredo was like, hey, hop on this podcast we're doing, I was like, I'm down. This is a big deal, y'all. And I don't know if have y'all heard anything about Prop 15? You know what it's about?
We have, but let's assume that we haven't, so that you can sort of just, in case some of our audience members haven't heard anything much about it.
Yeah, so really, Prop 15 is about closing a commercial property tax loophole that is only benefiting like the biggest corporations and private investors in California. If you hear anything else, it's actually not really true, right? Like that's the bottom line of what it does. And it also has some supports for small businesses and a few other things in it. But at its most basic, what Prop 15 is a way to close an existing commercial property tax loophole that has existed since, I believe, 1978 when Prop 13 was passed, right? And that's what it's about. And so the way that this came about, this has been about 40 years in the making to have this proposition be on the ballot. There have been multiple attempts to repeal it. And this is finally the year where we have the alignment, we have the right electorate to actually make it happen. And so the reason I'm personally excited about it and just in general excited about it is that it's going to mean $12 billion that we get to recover that have been lost because of this loophole, right? From corporations that are going to go into communities and schools every year. So it's not like a one-time thing. It's like ongoing every year, $12 billion. And that's money that we've been losing out on because of this loophole, right? And so you can imagine that corporations are throwing down hard against it. They're spreading lies. They actually got docked points or got in big trouble recently because they were putting on their informational that the initiative would raise taxes for residents and a few other things that were actually not true.
Yeah, so I noticed that. That's one of the fear tactics that they're trying to do is they're trying to like make this a tax issue for everyone, saying that like everyone's gonna get taxed, right? It's property taxes for everybody. And I want to talk a little bit about that piece because I feel like people don't understand like the history of Prop 13, which is really important. So if you don't mind, I'm sort of interjecting like I do all the time. So Prop 13,
do it.
Go ahead.
Do it. What you shared at the forum that we had with the college students, that'd be great for you to share.
Yeah, so Prop 13 is a proposition that happened in the 1970s. I forget what specific year off the top of my head, but it was a response by racist white power structures in our society uh, as a response to desegregation. And so one of the things that happened is that people who, in a sort of genius, but like also like underhanded, racist, and also like devious way, people married school funding with property taxes and created the local funding formulas that Prop 13 sort of like mandates. Is that it was a way for wealthy communities to keep their dollars, their tax dollars, their property tax dollars in their neighborhoods. So knowing that the communities are currently in 1970 still segregated, it meant that segregated communities got to keep their tax dollars in their own schools. And so it prevented the state of California from shifting, like Bel Air money or, Beverly Hills money or Palos Verdes money to like Compton or any of that sense, keeping wealthy neighborhood schools wealthy and poor schools. And when we say poor, we're talking about segregated, sort of still segregated communities, Black and brown communities. So it was a mechanism to basically maintain like long-term segregation in terms of like wealth and funding of schools. Part of that includes property taxes. And so the tax loophole that you're referring to is that one of the issues with taxes is that like people pay residents and businesses equally pay taxes on their land based on like the purchase price, the original purchase price. And so with Prop 15, and I know you're probably going to cover this too, but with Prop 15, that means that commercial properties that were, part of family owned businesses, 60, 70, 80 years ago are still paying taxes on their original like ownership, even though those properties probably belong now to their grandkids or whoever, like because the business is a separate entity, like they haven't updated their taxes. And so this is actually really important. This law specifically only covers commercial real estate. It does not cover residents. So like if you're a homeowner, this is not going to affect you at all. But yeah, that's the short version of the Prop 13. And so this is an effort to right the racism wrongs of Prop 13. This is an effort to try to pass equity so that, all the school, especially in the context, you talk about 40 years, 40 years ago, California had the best education system in the country. Currently, we're somewhere near the bottom in 46th or 47th. That kind of goes up and down, but we're in the like 40th, like because of this funding structure.
Yeah, and that's really what it is, and that's why Californians for Justice, along with like one of the biggest coalitions I've ever seen around labor, faith, community groups coming together because of how racist and inequitable this this loophole has been, right? That has persisted since the 70s. And so for us, like when Proposition 15 passes, it'll be the most significant proposition in advancing and closing racial inequities in the state, right? The mechanisms to capture the funding are going to be equity based, and it's gonna get us to start closing those persistent inequities that our Black and brown communities are faced with as far as like just the basic funding, right? So that's how we're thinking about it. The other thing that you had mentioned was around just you kind of mentioned it, but really around the small business support, right? So that's another thing you're going to hear the opposition talk about is how it's going to hurt small businesses. Well, the great news is that actually there's exemptions. So under the current law, businesses have to pay property taxes, right? And they have to pay it on things like their equipment, their supplies, their machinery, desks, chairs, restaurant equipment, computer servers, right? But under Prop 15, the first 500,000 in fixtures and equipment would be exempt for all businesses. So for a small business, that's enough to cover their entire tax bill for fixtures and equipment, right? So it's almost like the way we're talking about it's like a once in a generation tax cut for small businesses. So that's like what's really powerful about this. And so the opposition is coming for Black and brown business owners and saying this is going to hurt you, when actually written into the language is this exemption that's going to benefit them. So, that's one thing I just want to like double underscore, double underline, like this is actually going to benefit small businesses, right? The other thing that I had talked about is just how is this money going to end up where it needs to be, right? Understandably, folks are like, how is this going to happen, right? And so on the public education side, so the split between the 12 billion, let's say we have 12 billion today that we're going to split up in California, 40% is going to go to public education, right? So 89% will go to K to 12, and then the rest, 11%, is going to go to community colleges. And so the way that's going to happen is through the local control funding formula. I know that's a really long phrase. Does anyone know what the local control funding formula is?
No.
So, it's been in effect about 5 years. CFJ was involved with a broader coalition of folks all across the state that were education stakeholders and really focused on equity to really make it happen. It is, to this point, and as far as I know, the most equitable way to budget education and fund education in the country. So the way that it does it is you have your like base funding for every school that you get, right? So every school gets a certain amount. The rest of the money is actually distributed equitably. So more a percentage of money is added on for English language learners, low-income youth, and foster youth. So it's truly equitable. There's some challenges. Some districts are still fighting it, right? But it's really an amazing way to fund our education. And the other important piece that CFJ advocated for is that there needs to be community, student, parent input in part of that funding, so that communities get to say, our parents and students can say, I need some of this money to go to this, right? And so that money that's going to be coming in from Prop 15 will go through the local control funding formula. So it's even an organizing strategy, right? Like as an organizer, that's music to my ears. Well, then we have time from now, when Prop 15 passes in November till the 2 years when it's implemented, we have time to organize and strengthen the local control funding formula so that it's serving our communities more. So that's the education side. So 40%, right? And some of the things that people are really excited about funding are the things that we all know our schools need, especially our schools with high need students, right? School nurses, more counselors, and not just counselors for your grades, but like mental health supports, right? Librarians, smaller class sizes, technical programs and job training. A lot of our teachers, we have a huge disconnect in California where a high percentage of the teachers do not reflect what the students look like. We have white teachers and youth of color. And so how can we create more supports and training to support those teachers and then also bring in more teachers of color?
Quick question. Not that you necessarily know this is going to happen or not, but I know that over the course of the last 20 years, there's been a defunding of sort of like trade courses. And I mean, that's the, that's a consequence of like a lot of different things. Part of it is tracking system, right? So there was a really negative sort of tracking system that existed where people of color were putting to those kind of tracks, specifically like men and young men and women were tracked into like, I mean, there's a whole history of like Mexican Americans specifically being tracked into like working class like positions, right? So like this is a whole thing with the Chicano movement. So it was good from the perspective of now, like, okay, now we're making college more accessible to that population. But at the same time, with the shifting economy, one of the things we talked about on the show is a lot like is the economy, right? So with the fact that like, that happened, we stopped tracking students into those jobs, which is a good thing. But then at the same time, we shifted our education away in terms of focusing on college, where the labor market is really shifting in a lot of ways. And so like we also made good jobs inaccessible to the very people we were trying to support and help. So do you think any of this money is going to end up going to like trying to get those programs back up and running? I know that in Long Beach, they're trying to work with some labor unions to try to create a pathway for high school students to get into trade jobs.
Yeah, and I had other folks asking about, questions around like the curriculum and all these other things. I think that all of that is possible because there will be some like control by the community, but first is passing it. And then that's like, it's almost like as an organizer, you want to think about all the different opportunities for community to get involved and have a say. It's like the first step is let's pass it. And then we have this opportunity. And everything wouldn't go into effect. The funding would come down in like 2 years, right? It's in 2023. So we have the time to build out the infrastructure, right? And also strengthen all these mechanisms to make sure that we have the advocacy ready to go to say where the money should go.
Yeah, and that's partially why I asked the question, is because one of the things I want our listeners to sort of think about is let's have vision. Like, like we need to pass Prop 15 because it means a ton of money for our schools. And then the backup question is, well, what are people going to do with that money? Well, let's start figuring that out. Let's start, engaging in those conversations in our communities to, what could we do with that money? How could we re-envision education? How could we not necessarily restructure it, but what kind of education do we want our children to have? And how could this money help support that? Those are conversations that folks should already start engaging in. For me, what that means is that, like, that one, like, we train people for jobs, but like that's not, y'all know how I feel about like careerism. Like, our lives are meant to be lived. Our job is just how we pay for them. And so, like, we need to educate young people, not just for a job. I mean, obviously we want them to have jobs because we want them to like pay for the survival, right? But for me, it's about envisioning and having vision. And like, I think in this day and age, not enough people have vision, right? We have a lot of like naysayers, like, oh no, it just means more taxes. Like, no, like it means more taxes for communities, for them to do, like, to create a new world, really. Sorry, I get really
I mean, you like jumped me into like the other part of it. So that's like, so 40% of 12 billion goes to public education. The other 60% goes to local government, right? And which is another organizing opportunity. So this could be through counties, cities, and special districts. Funding could be, libraries, parks and recreation, firefighters, first responders, senior services, public health, housing and homeless services, public transportation. What I like about it is that there's a local control woven into that as well. So it's not prescriptive. It's not saying, what Long Beach needs is the same as like where I grew up in Porterville in the Central Valley is what they need, right? Completely different places, rural versus urban, different needs, different challenges. And so each local, like county and city, like they get to help shape where that money goes. And there's also going to be like public accountability. So written into the law, there has to be a clear, like, haciendo cuentas, like, I don't know how to say it, but like, really you have to make sure that the community knows where that money went and that it's tracked and that there's opportunities for input. So that's like the local government side.
And sort of this part is really important just from like the community engagement piece. Like, this means we have to put in work, just being real, like that, like who is considered the community is going to really matter. Like, we know who has time to engage in city council meetings. We know who has, resources to not have to worry about, oh, I got to be at work. So like, part of this means that we're going to have to activate, we're going to have to get organized and actually make sure that we hold people accountable to make sure that this money is spent on the actual needs, right? To make sure it doesn't go to to fund the police even further, right? Right now we're in the midst of a sort of defund the police movement, which doesn't mean we don't want police. It just means that, we want resources. We want more resources to go to the things that actually deal with the needs people have. And so this money would be that, but in order for us to avoid that money being captured by these folks, or for for community development that isn't really community development, that's business development, we have to make sure that we hold these people accountable, and that means we have to organize. And so that's important to sort of keep in mind. But I mean, I think that just the fact that it is about community accountability is really important. And I was saying, again, it provides opportunity for us to build community even.
And I have a question which, might be too specific and you might not be able to answer now. But as an organizer, what sort of strategies come to mind in order to work through the barriers that usually exist in like Black and Brown communities where, parents, that keep parents and families from being able to be part of those conversations and decisions? Like,
I mean, I think Yeah, a couple of things that come up always are accessibility, right? Back to the point where like low income communities, Black and brown communities oftentimes don't have the time or luxury to show up to a meeting in the middle of the day. So what are we doing to make the participation more accessible? Moving meetings to the evenings. Is there a way to call in? I think that COVID and this online shift creates an opportunity to think about, we don't need people to be present to give their input. Can they call it in? Can they email it in? Can someone, read out their what's been happening in the school district is you send in your comments and someone reads them out loud publicly, right? So I think that that's like one of the number one things is like, how are you creating the opportunities for the folks that really need to be giving input to give input? We don't want the usual suspects to do that, right? And I think accessing the community, right? Figuring out how to reach out to them. What are the like maybe more of the localized ways to do it? Is it through like local businesses? Sometimes folks, can show up and they're finding out about information because they went to like their local market, and that's where they put up the information, right?
Barbershop.
What was that?
I said, or barbershops or salons or
yeah,
La panadería.
yeah, exactly. The like fixtures in the community, right?
Why'd you have to say panadería? Now I want like.
I know. I'm thinking of secret. Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
So this is a good time for the community and small businesses to kind of unite, right? If this is like something that's going to be so good for the community and small businesses, I think it's going to be time for us to really unite and have both of our voices heard together. And hopefully we can make a change together.
That's such a great point, Guillermo, because I think that's what the opposition is trying to do, is to divide and conquer, right? They're micro-targeting Latinos, African Americans, to tell them this is bad for you, right? Because they ultimately don't want to have to pay their fair share of property taxes, right? And then they don't want to see that go to our communities.
I was saying that just 10% of California's most expensive non-residential commercial properties account for 92% of Prop 15's loophole closing revenue.
Yeah, so that's all who's like holding up our, like they're holding our money, right? Like they've been capturing that money that was meant for our community since 1978, whenever it passed, right? That's why it's such a nefarious thing. And there's this whole wave of like not taxing, anti-taxation that's very conservative, and so that's why it's been really hard to overturn it. And so this is like that throwdown year. So I've been doing this work for, I don't know, too long, but for like 20 years. And ever since I started, people talked about overturning Prop 13, and people would come together and focus group and say, is the electorate ready? Do we think that this time around? So every 4 years, I feel like the conversation would happen. Like, is it time?
And this is the thing that I mentioned. This is the deviousness, but also the genius of marrying taxes with education. Is that nobody wants to touch taxes. And so for over 40 years almost, like nobody wants to touch, like nobody wants to deal with funding education, because that means touching Prop 13, and you don't touch Prop 13 because homeowners are like, no, you can't raise my taxes. And so I think that's what the genius of Prop 15 is that the genius is that it only goes after that specific tax loophole for commercial properties. Like Guillermo said, we're only talking about the very wealthiest people in the state. We're talking about people that, and when we say commercial properties, we're not talking about mom and pop like shops that happen to own their own building. Let's be honest. Like most small businesses don't even own the building they live in. They do business out of. We're talking about like massive,
Disneyland, Chevron.
Yeah.
They can pay their fair share.
Yeah, we're talking about like people who own massive swaths of land all over the state, and basically like they're aristocratic landlords who aren't. The irony is that the aristocrats at least had a responsibility to the serfs, right? They had to protect them. These people are just getting this tax subsidy that's 40 or 50 or 60 years old, like from property they bought way back when. Imagine Disneyland, who's owned their land. Like, how long have they owned it? They've owned it since like the 1930s or 40s, right? Or probably before that. and they're paying taxes based on that. You know, when land was like back then, houses were worth like $40,000 or $50,000, and they're paying.
You should do a podcast just on how terrible Disneyland is. Like,
Yeah,
I love Disneyland characters, but they're terrible. And I just wanted to jump in and say too, like, to double underline too, the other important thing, besides that this will not hurt small businesses and will actually help them, is that this will protect all residential property, like you said it, right? In the past, any attempts to change this would not work because people thought this was going to hurt their grandparents' homes, their own homes, but it will not impact homeowners or renters in any property if it's used for residential purposes. So apartments, mobile homes, assisted living facilities, single family homes, condos, even residential properties and mixed use buildings will not be affected, right? And this is the thing that the opposition got caught for, because they were lying already in their materials, right? So the judge ordered them to strike it out, but they're still. I just saw an ad yesterday drop about how it was gonna. I forgot what their first part of it was, and then they made this like fluffy comment like, "Oh, and they agree that homeowners are next," and it's just like so just vague enough that it's not an assertion, but it's enough to plant the seed. Right. So
they're trying to scare people. Again, they're trying to include themselves in with other people who pay property taxes. And there's a clear distinction. The Prop 15 only goes after like large commercial real estate. And this is the problem with, I mean, in general, like people assume like, this is the problem with the political economy of the United States, is that everyone eventually thinks they're going to be a millionaire. So even if right now you're not, everybody assumes, well, that means that maybe I become a millionaire, I'm going to have to pay commercial property taxes. And so that's what they're trying to like grab onto. So one, this does not affect, and no one is wanting to, nobody cares about, like, not that we don't care, but we're like, people who care about funding education aren't trying to increase property taxes because we recognize that, like, we're not trying to hurt mom and pop. We're not trying to hurt your grandma. We're not trying to hurt, like, we recognize that like property taxes are already a burden for them. This is for people who have owned their properties for over 50 years and are paying taxes on what they paid in 1970. That was a dog barking, just so our viewers know. Norma has a doggy, and she's trying to hide her doggy from us, but like our listeners, I'm pretty sure love doggies, so it's completely okay.
She's very adorable, and she's 4 months old and crazy right now.
What kind of dog is she?
She's a mix. We don't know. We just got her from a rescue 2 weeks ago, so it's a lot of fun.
And what's her name?
Georgia May.
Georgia May says you should vote yes on Prop 15.
She will be endorsing on her own IG account that I created for her. And the other thing too is that a lot of like Silicon Valley like companies, and I believe also Facebook, support Prop 15 because they came in after the loophole, so they're paying their fair share, and so they're like, why am I paying like what my property value is worth right now when these other companies that have been here forever are still paying what they paid in the 1970s?
Yeah, and even in terms of like even like current homeowners who have just bought in the last 10 or 15 or even 20 years, right? Even they're paying their fair share because they're paying based on like a more recent valuation of their property. Like we're talking about people who have like whose land has been in their trust and their family's business trust, or their like it's like the land is owned by a business or corporation separate from individuals, but it's been in the family. Like some family controls Disney, like the Disney family controls Disney still. And these people are paying property taxes based on like, and I'm exaggerating here, but I'm sure that some people who still own land from like the late 1800s, early 1900s are paying taxes based on the valuation from back then. And so, if mom and pop who buy a house today have to pay taxes based on today's valuation of their house, why do corporations get a pass and pay taxes on 50 or 60 years ago what their land was valued at back then?
I have a question. Sorry,
yes.
You might have mentioned this already, but can you talk a little bit more about what the loophole is? Like how? Like what exactly? I know it allows, you know, them to not pay those taxes, but like, can you talk about the loophole? Like how?
Yeah, that's
That makes
basically
sense?
the loophole, is that they continue to pay the taxes from that period in the 1970s. And part of the loophole too, so there's a few little things in there, but
Okay.
is that as long as like someone like holds on to the company, like a slice of it from that time period, it still keeps that value. It doesn't get reassessed to the current property value, right? So that it cuts that out. Yeah.
Yeah, so the way the tax property valuation work, like the way that like property taxes work in California because of Prop 13 is that you pay taxes on the value of the property when you bought it. And
Okay.
so, you know, like my parents, they bought a house in 1996, 97. Like, you know, they were paying taxes on the value then. Then they bought it for I think 100, maybe like $200,000, and so they're paying taxes on $200,000. My sister bought the house from them just like 2 or 3 years ago, and so now she has to pay taxes on a $500,000 or $600,000 house. So their tax rate goes up. And so like, and that's normal. Like, you know, people buy properties and sell properties sort of on a regular basis. The problem is that some of these properties, like I said, were bought when land was, you know, like a lot cheaper in California. And so these people are like, and a lot of it is actually really unproductive land. It's just land that's just sitting there that could be used for housing market issues. It could be used for other things. And so they're paying taxes on land that they paid maybe like, you know, $30,000 in today's worth multi-million dollars. And so instead of paying, you know, $1 million, like the tax burden on $1 million property, they're paying like, you know, $20,000. So like they're like, and so that's what the problematics with it.
Can I also, I think one thing that's really important is that we do have like one of the biggest coalitions ever, like throwing down on this, right? We have people phone banking all across the state, but we still have like, as you can imagine, like corporations don't want to pay the fair share. They don't want to pay what they need to pay. So it's going to take all of us, all hands on deck. Like, you know, I'm going to be calling everyone and their mom and asking them to phone bank with me. Right. And I think that's my plug too. Like, of course, if I wasn't an organizer, I wouldn't do this. Right. But like, we need everyone to phone bank. We're doing a partnership with Million Voters Project. So it's really easy to sign up. You get a training and then you get to phone bank. And what we do is we try to make it interactive, even though we're, you know, in COVID times. So we'll have Zoom calls up. And so we're chatting with each other, talking about how it's going with the calls, trying to make it interactive. And then we're doing the phone banking. But you know, as much like that's the number one thing if folks are wanting to know how they can get involved. Phone bank, talk to your family. You know, a lot of our family members are confused about what's happening, about what it is, and the opposition is counting on confusion.
Yeah,
So,
and let's be honest, the opposition has, you know, all the money they've been saving for 40 or 50 years by not paying these taxes.
yeah.
They're using that money to post on Facebook, to post on.
Yeah.
You know,
I was gonna say that when you Google Prop 15, the first thing that pops up is like an ad that's like a website to know on Prop 15. That's the first thing that pops up. So it's like when people are Googling it, it's like that's the first thing they're gonna see. That's the first thing that they're gonna click on, and like that's what they're gonna think it is. When in reality, it's like misinformation.
Yeah, and obviously they're gonna throw like millions and millions of dollars at this because this is gonna mean billions of dollars in them paying taxes. And so like, you know, $1 million invested is nothing when, you know, you have billions of dollars on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, this is definitely why we need people to get involved, to like get like to, you know, to phone bank, to talk to your families, talk to your members, like inform your students, like for those of you all that are in college, you know, let everyone know, like anyone know, like it's like, you know, yes, on Prop 15. Like, tell them you'll disown them as family members if they don't vote on Prop 15. I'm, you know, like I'm being facetious, right? But like, this is how important it is because this means our kids having a better education. And in the current economy and in the current world situation that we're living in, we need better educated people. Like, you know, the reason we have to stay in this pandemic like longer than we should have was because we don't listen to science, because our education systems are failing us. You know, people are more likely to listen to conspiracy theories because we're poorly educating our children, and it's like I won't go on that rant, but Prop 15, yes.
Yeah, and then just two last things. We need more Spanish speakers. So I'm actually leading the Spanish speaker training bureau, and we're having another training on the 16th. And so what that means is you get to do a deep dive on what the proposition's about. So some of the stuff we talked about today, and then you actually get to practice your pitch. Because the other thing that's important is the stories, right? So if I asked all of us about our high school and middle school experience, what resources or gaps of resources that we have, I think it's really important. People remember things, not sure the data is important, right? But it's always the stories, right? So if you can connect your personal reason why you're supporting this, right? I'm supporting this because growing up, in the Central Valley, there was a clear divide on access and I didn't have whatever, right? And you connect that to your why and why you're supporting. People are going to remember that more than you just throwing a bunch of numbers at them, right? Besides the 12 billion, which is really important. But yeah, and so if folks are interested in that as well, I can send that out. I know that this is airing, so I just realized this is airing after, but there will still be opportunities. We just haven't finalized all the dates to do training to be a speaker in Spanish and English.
Where can they have access to that information? Is it an Instagram or an email that they could email to?
There's Yes on 15, the website. You can sign up there. Or folks can follow up with me too. I don't know what the best way it might be, but people can sign up on the yes15.org website.
That website is really informational, by the way. Everyone should check it out if you haven't already.
And if you're gonna Google Prop 15, just type in yes on 15 first instead of just Prop 15.
Yeah, I think that's important for listeners to always be skeptical of what they see,
especially sponsored ads.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's always important to be skeptical and do further research than just the first thing that you see.
One of the general comments I have about propositions, because this is just one of many propositions in California, is think about if you're seeing a lot of ads on TV about a proposition, think about how much money it costs to run an ad and who has that kind of money. And what do you think their interest is? Do you think that people that have a lot of money have the same interest as you? That's one of my first signs that I probably don't support a proposition is if I see ads on it 24/7. So I remember during the presidential primary when
I was just gonna say that
when the New York guy was running ads
Mike Bloomberg. Oh wait, no, was it Mike Bloomberg?
Yeah, Bloomberg, racist Bloomberg. I was just dude, just even if I didn't know who he was, just the fact that he was spending so much damn money, trying to convince me, you're trying too hard, bro. Seriously, that means that you probably don't like the shit that you're trying to promote.
And in Spanish commercials too, it was the only candidate that I would see in Spanish commercials was Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah, and it would come on on every break.
Yes,
I was at the car dealership getting an oil change, and the whole time I was there, every single commercial break he came on Spanish. I was like, this dude, he's annoying.
And as we approach this election, this is going to happen with this proposition. It's gonna be exactly like that. So I think our listeners are more in line with what we're already thinking. But people should always if you think about who has that kind of money. One of the beautiful things I think about this proposition, I want to go back to what Norma was saying, is that it actually is a silver lining because it's one of the very few things over the last 20 years that so many people have signed on to. So it's created a position of solidarity from labor to grassroots nonprofit organizations to education-minded folks. Sometimes on the left, we tend to be fragmented, but on this particular issue, I would say that 99% of us are on the same side. I did want to ask you about that, Norma. I saw an anti-Prop 15 ad, and I noticed that the NAACP was supporting the no on 15 thing. Can you? I don't know if you know about that.
Don't get me started. So what's shitty is that from what I understand from what folks were sharing, is that it's only a few chapters of NAACP that oppose it, and they have been misinformed. And you know what? NAACP is problematic sometimes. And
yeah. Well, that's actually why I wanted to bring it up. Was it the chapter that's that was chaired by Rachel Dolezal?
Or what's the other one? The new Rachel Dolezal that just came out. What's her name?
Good.
Yeah, one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know what's up, and it's really unfortunate, and I was so disappointed. So and the opposition is targeting, right? So I got a text that you could tell was targeted to like a brown person, and it led with, actually let me read it to y'all because it's trash.
And as you look it up, one of the things that I want to throw out there is this happens, right? So like again, the NAACP has interesting and good history, but like it's also problematic the very same way that LULAC is, right?
Yeah.
Like LULAC, and most recently, like one of the chapters endorsed, or one of the presidents of one of the chapters endorsed, Donald Trump, maybe like a year or two ago. And it's one of these things where, like not all, what's the common saying that not all skin folk are kinfolk, is that, they go after people in our community to try to be speakers for our community and represent our community, but they don't represent the interests of our community. Go ahead, Norma, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hesitate to give them even airtime, but this is a pro Proposition 15 call. But it's so disappointing that the opposition gets to use the NAACP, which is a recognized name like the ACLU, for their purposes, right? So the message is the California NAACP says when minorities can't find work, they start their own small businesses. But Prop 15's higher property taxes will hurt Black and Latino businesses the most and make inequality even worse. Vote no on Prop 15. Vote paid for by noonprop15.org. So the deviousness of that message, right?
Yeah. They're trying to stoke racial fear. They're trying to stoke, especially in communities that are already economically suffering. So they're playing on the economic sort of
desperation.
And it's problematic because people are naturally scared by something like that, right? The reality,
and it's a basic lie, right? Like that's the thing. It's like they were able to lie and get away with it in that way, and so that's why we're also doing a massive media strategy as well with Earn Media, doing letters to the editor. Guillermo, I don't know if you saw it on the website, but they even have like a thing where you can automatically you enter your zip code. And you get connected to the local newspapers and you can type in letters to the editor. So it's also it's a fight on the votes, but it's also a fight on the narrative, to win the hearts and minds of people, really, right? So there's a lot of media work that folks are doing, press conferences, letters to the editor, op-eds, to also counter what the opposition is sharing.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's very important that if you want to be involved, definitely check out the website out, and that's something that you could do from home. You could just type in your zip code and send it, because that's important. If it's going to be shared to the newspapers, is it an email pitch already, set up?
Yeah.
Guillermo's all excited because he's a journalism major, so he's like, I want to write something. Look at him.
Oh, if you want to, yes, please do. You can write to your local newspaper. There's a link to it under Get Involved. You can volunteer, write to the local newspaper, go to an event near you on, virtually, and then request a speaker for your org. So that's the other cool thing is the Democratic Party. I was on their call last week. They had a conversation about the propositions, right? And so they requested a speaker. So I went and talked about it. And hopefully, the Dem Party sometimes doesn't do enough. They don't do enough. That's a whole other conversation.
That's anyway. A whole other conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at least on this, there's cohesiveness that everyone's on the same page. And so as we sort of wrap up, Norma, is there anything else you want to sort of let our listeners know?
No, I mean, just to double underline, again, this is, if we pass Prop 15, it will be able to begin reversing a lot of the harmful damage that was done to Black and Brown communities in this state for the last 40 years. It will not hurt or impact residential properties in any way, and it will support small businesses by giving them tax exemptions around the fixtures of up to $500,000. So this will help give tax cuts to small businesses versus hurting them.
Yeah, like this is specifically going after the wealthiest property owners in the state who have been dodging taxes for a really long time, and it's their turn to pay the fair share of their taxes, so that we can improve the state for everyone. Like education supports everyone. Educating our youth is a net plus for businesses, because then you have a more educated workforce. And I hate using that example because I think the people beyond the workforce, but it's a net positive for everybody. It creates more businesses. And so don't just vote on Prop 15. Don't just vote yes on Prop 15. Get involved and make sure that you let other people know. You talk to your grandma, to abuelito, you talk to all of it. Anybody that can vote, make sure that they vote and they turn out for this proposition. So it's not just about the presidential election this year. In California, there's a lot of propositions. I would say that this is probably the most important one, that people, we need to make sure we pass this, so that we can begin to have beneficial conversation around funding education. And once we get the funding, we can figure out, okay, now how do we use it? Which I'm really excited about the prospects of that, because I love just having opportunity to think through things, right? Instead of just and we all hear the stories of teachers who have to fundraise on those websites, their own money, they have to pay for their own supplies, that kind of shit. That shouldn't be going on, man. Not in California, not in the wealthiest. We have the fifth largest economy in the world. Teachers shouldn't have to be buying their own shit for classrooms.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight, and on this note, I know Guillermo touched upon earlier, which is this is the first step. We're trying to get funding. The second step is to organize, as Norma was mentioning, and work together to actually have community input and get involved and work together to make our schools and our education system better. So thank you, Norma, for sharing on Prop 15. We are so happy that you were here and were able to explain more about the proposition and just about the lies that are out there for people who could be conscious and more skeptic when they hear that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Norma, for joining us. Appreciate you and all the work that you do at CFJ and up and down the state, trying to promote a more equitable education for folks, and other work that you do. We look forward to having you more on the podcast more to talk about other stuff and do more shit talking, and then we can also talk about unicorns and Mary. What was her name? Your dog's name?
Georgia May.
Georgia May.
You can be on the podcast next.
Cool.
Thank you all. I appreciate the time, and definitely let me know. I'm down.
Appreciate your time, Norma. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Bye, Norma.
Remember, vote yes on Prop 15, everyone.
Sí, a Proposición 15.